All right. Can everyone hear me? Great. Well, that's already a good success enough, right? Um, so first, a few easy questions. I'm gonna ask to raise your hand if you're involved in building a product. Yes, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you're involved in building a product. Okay, that's great. We have quite a few hands. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Hopefully things are better now. So now, second question, and your product has customers. Still quite a decent amount of hands. And customer feedback, you can get it, right? And you can acquire it from customers, and it influences what you're doing next. Okay, a little less, but still enough. And now, the next question I'm going to ask is, I mean, what would you do differently? How would you keep building your product if you had no customers? And I'm encouraging you to just actually say out loud what you think you do differently from what you're doing now, or what you wouldn't do. Sorry, go ahead. Well, okay, that's interesting. Any other ideas or thoughts? What would you do differently or would not do at all? That's a really good one. And I'm going to talk, I think, somewhat around that, how to get a customer if you don't have a customer in in the next slides. So building a product without a customer, that's a story in progress because we're still building the product. And we finally, a disclaimer, we're finally going to get our first customer end of this year. It's been a pretty long road to get there. Oh, something just happened with the presentation. Okay, thank you. And again, as I said, it's a story in progress. So I'm going to tell you what we've been doing so far. And this hopefully will be of benefit to teams and people building new products from scratch, or just teams in general who are interested in engaging their customers more and talking to them and spending more time understanding how to work with customers. Just a few things about myself. I'm Vlad, as Michal has already mentioned, and born and raised in Ukraine. Last 10 years have been spent in requirements management, writing requirements, all sorts of things in that regard. 6 years public safety projects, pretty much all through Motorola. I do have some certifications, and I'm married to a aspiring writer, so she just published her first book last year. And right now I'm a product guy at Motorola. I work on a product called Command Central CAD. And just, it's going to be important before we dive into actual steps I followed and what I did, just to give some context, because it will be, I think, more valuable to understand what I did if you understand the environment and the context a little better. So 2018 was the time when this product development has started. There was a different product manager at that point in time working on it. There was a number of assumptions being made about what we're doing there. And I was working on some other projects, still in the public safety space, at the same time. So then I joined in December 2019. That was the time when I joined the project, building this product that we're doing right now. Fast forward a year and a half later, so June 2021, we have our official release. People in Motorola, you might have heard about this Command Central suite release in June 2021, where it was announced to the public we now have this suite of products, which are cloud-based for public safety customers. And we had our first pilot, which is basically an agency for some time getting their hands in the software, trying to use it without being a full-blown daily user of the system. In February 2022 was the first contract signed, and now we're on our way to Q4, where we'll finally have this customer going live with a system we've been building so far for nearly 4 years. That's a long time without customers. So how were we able, I guess, to cope? And also a very important thing to understand. Why is it so long? Because typically, when you're building a new product, one of the first things you want to do is get a new customer. So why is it so difficult to get a customer in the product I'm working on right now? And oh, by the way, when I joined the product, I had mixed feelings, right? First of all, I was quite excited because it's the first cloud project I've ever worked on. It's much more responsibility in terms of compared to what I was doing before this. So I was excited. At the same time, I was very nervous because I've never done cloud projects before. I've never worked on a project of that scale before. So all of that was making me nervous. So why would anyone be nervous working on a new project, working on a new product? This is where it's again important to understand the context, the environment of this product. And there are probably quite a few people from Motorola over here, but to everyone, just make sure we're all talking the same terms. CAD, computer-aided dispatch system. You probably heard those clips or watched those movies where 911, where's your emergency? So that's the kind of environment, or that's the kind of product that we're building. We're building this system that allows the dispatcher or the person in a 911 call center pick up communicate with a caller, get information about what's going on, if it's a domestic violence, if it's an accident, whatever else, all that information needs to be captured somewhere. So it could be then communicated to the officers or firefighters who will be dispatched to respond to that situation. So there's a lot of pressure on the system functioning properly, stable, in a stable manner, being reliable. But it's also it's a mission critical environment, right? So there's a lot of stakes. There's a lot at stake if things go wrong. So that's why it's important to have stable and good products, and that's why there's a lot of pressure also. And slides, okay, on making things work. Slides have gone, okay, that's better now, thanks. And so this is CC-CAD, or the Command Central CAD is kind of doing all of this incident management, helping dispatchers to find the people to send the response, capture information about incidents, and just manage life cycle of an incident. That's what the CAD system is about. And if I was to put this into a slightly larger context of a dispatch center, it's typically a dark room because they stay there for hours, and so that their eyes don't get really tired. They dim the light, and this operator is sitting in front of 4 to 6 monitors, 3 computers, 3 mice, 3 keyboards, and then the application that they're using for dispatch is occupying typically 2 or 3 monitors in those 6. So just imagine this kind of motion, moving between different systems. When you manage an L1 call and you switch to CAD to enter information and you switch to radio system, it's just constant movement, constant motion, and people can get pretty sore by moving in that space for days. And so we are kind of in the center where we have this functionality with the map, so that you can see where the incident is at, where the units are, and basically be able to assign response. And we're also here, in the center with the ability to see details of an incident you're currently managing and what units are out there available to be dispatched. So that's the ecosystem that we're operating in, and some context about how much the person is supposed to work and focus on at the same time to do their job properly. So there's a lot of, I guess, at stake. It's important to build the systems right. And challenges, it's fun to build a new product. It's exciting. Everyone wants to, developers immediately jump. We're going to have this clean code, good infrastructure. We're going to dry principles, do not repeat yourself. Everything else, unit tests everywhere. So there is pressure from the team wanting to do this very clean principles, constant refactoring. But there is also pressure because this space, public safety and 911 in general, it's not a new space. It's been there for years. So there are products that exist already that are very rich in functionality. And when we're building something from scratch, essentially we're trying to replace systems that already exist. So there is a very big pressure from, first of all, internally within the organization, because sales are used to selling the product which is feature rich, Sales are used to sell the product which has all this functionality they can sell to premium customers who can afford paying for this, right? So they're going to push you. They're pushing us to add more features. Customers are used to having those feature-rich products as well, so they're going to ask you to do more. And same with competitors. Competitors, because they keep adding more features, that increases this pressure on the product, because everyone wants more and more and more and more. And so in this kind of fight, it's challenging to be able to get something out there. That's why there is a lot of that's why it does take time to build products like this, since there is all of this pressure coming from very different angles. So what did I do and how did I approach working in this environment? There's been more than 5 steps really, but if I was to distill it into just a few specific things maybe worth remembering, it's working with my manager, working with teams to understand what to focus on. So basically setting the boundaries or some sort of not even scope, but yes, setting the understanding of who are we going to go after in terms of the market specifically, understanding some sort of a minimum viable product, and that's an overloaded terms, I know, so I'll try to explain what I mean there. And be able to get some of the periodic feedback. If we don't have a customer, we have to be able to acquire some sort of information somehow. So that's a very important step here. And we're back to not showing the slide. And then being able, and we're back to not showing the slide, sorry. Yeah, thanks. And then finally, being able to do everything necessary to get this first customer that we are getting, end of year. And maybe next year, if we're successful, I'll be able to tell you how all of that actually went. So the number one step is understanding or setting some sort of a scope or boundaries of the customer you're after. As I said, the space is established, right? You have all these public safety agencies, which are fire, police departments, medical agencies, sheriff offices, tribal agencies in the US, very, very different agencies which are responsible for maintaining public safety. And yeah. Okay, I mean, that's fine, I can connect whatever necessary, but maybe let's just see if it happens again. What I'm trying to say here is that very different segments are going to have different requirements, and there is this pressure from sales asking to build more features because they want to be able to tackle everyone in the market, right? But maybe there is a way to reduce kind of like the pressure by focusing on a particular segment. So in this case, what we were able to do, we were able to dissect the market from different perspectives. And you can think about this yourself whenever you're building a product that you're working on. If there is too much pressure on building all these features for all the different customers, well, maybe there is a way to focus on a particular profile of a customer and box their needs and package their needs into what will become the scope of MVP. Why is this important to kind of dissect the market into different segments? Because as I said, they have different needs. And for example, fire, it's very important for fire agencies to make sure that the response times are very quick. So because the building can burn down in like 3 minutes or 4 minutes. So the sooner the people get on scene, the higher chance of saving the structure and saving the people. So they have fire agents have high need in system recommending units based on location and other factors. But if we go into police, the requirements may change. So also the size of an agency will dictate how much are they going to ask from a system. There are large agencies, for example, with 10+ dispatchers are going to ask a lot from stability, like sub-second response and those things. If we're building a new product, we cannot guarantee all those things consistently. So, we cannot go there. Plus, they're also asking for a lot more features. So in this way, just by thinking out loud, talking about this with, with my manager, with other people, we were able to identify, okay, we think the safest bet is this market of 1 to 2 seat dispatch centers who are moving away from either paper or from very simple systems. So they're not very sophisticated, right? And they have low expectations of what the system is supposed to do for them. And that's one way of reducing this pressure, is just going after someone who doesn't have as much expectations as your established customers would. And in this case, that's the thought process we followed to be able to identify our initial target market that we would go after. And once we know the target market, once we did this as an exercise, and it wasn't easy to do this because, as I said, there's a lot of pressure, right? Sales want to get more market. They want to be able to sell to more people. Well, this is actually reducing your market. This is actually making selling more difficult. But at the same time, I guess we'll have to plug in the power or something to see if it's going to help. I'm not sure. Okay, it's working, but I'm not sure I actually have a cable. So once we have done this, what's the next logical step? Any ideas? What would you do once you know who you're after? Once you know the market, the specific segment of the market that you're after. Any thoughts from the group, from the audience? What would you do next? Well, find a user is good, but okay, but we haven't defined what to build yet, right? Because we know who we're after, but we haven't yet defined what's the scope of expected scope for this minimum target. So the proxy is actually very good that you've mentioned this, because I'll come back to this in a few minutes. But unfortunately, yeah. The next step that we followed was this MVP, this very bloated, overloaded term of MVP. And this actually was probably the most interesting exercise from all the things I've done in this process. And this is where the past experience actually helps. Like, what happened was in 2019, it's even before I was engaged in a specific project, I was asked to help and facilitate a few sessions about understanding the scope of what is a minimum that a CAD system supposed to do. And what I did, basically, I invited a number of agencies of different groups, like police only, law, and fire, into different sessions. And I asked them to, I prepared like a bunch of sticky notes, which represented blocks of functionality in the product. For example, assignment of response, like sending units, or create management of incidents, just big blocks. And I asked them, as if they were doing a selection of a new CAD system, to tell me what are the things that are absolutely above the line, without which they would never consider replacing their current CAD system with a different CAD system. And that became some sort of a foundation of things above the line, basically became the MVP for that group of agencies, which we then, together with a few other product managers and engineers and designers, we had another set of sticky notes, which we placed, in a room in Krakow. And we stayed in that room for a few days. Well, not 24 hours, of course, but trying to argue and discuss what are we, with the customer profile we mentioned before, what are we going to settle on as our initial scope. And we came to some sort of a set of functionalities, a set of features grouped by different themes. So the items at the top represent themes, like big blocks of features, which were pretty thin. So this is the breadth of functionality, and this is the depth of functionality. So we had to come up with some sort of I guess a T-shape, right, where there's enough breadth and there's also some level of depth for the functionality we're trying to build for this agency. So now, once we know our scope, once we knew what we were supposed to do, we actually defined this back in February 2020, and it took us a year and a half to build that functionality. So, you could consider it to be not very agile, but we were following the plan, and right now we're getting ready to get our first customer. So it's going to be interesting to see how things will turn out, right? But once we have this MVP definition, and once we know who we're after, I think you mentioned proxy, right? You mentioned where are we going to get feedback, and how are we going to get feedback? Which leads me to my next point, customer proxies. And in this case, let me actually ask you, who do you think customer proxies can be? In general, maybe not thinking about a specific example, but let's say you're building a product, right? And you don't have customers yet. Where can you find substitutes for feedback? Okay, okay, that's good. Anyone else? Okay, uh-huh. So it's someone who works with customers, okay? Anyone else? Guys, you know it all. I don't know what I'm doing here, to be honest. Because that's exactly what I did, right? On one hand, Motorola has almost, if not more than 17,000 people. And a large chunk of them are people who used to be police officers, who used to be dispatchers, who used to be call takers, who used to be detectives, records clerks. So you name it, we have all these people. So it's just those resources. And I shouldn't have said resources. I loved what Angel said today about not calling people resources. So those people are in the company, they're available to help, they're available to give some answers in terms of questions you have, and they can also validate or just give feedback on the workflows you have. And yes, we also have other products. Like, as I said, we're building a new product, right? But Motorola already has CAD systems. For example, Flex, Premier One, those have incumbent customers, and those for Flex, there is 500 agencies using the software. For P1, I think probably around 100 or so in the US. And so you have 600 out of 6,500, which is 10% of people you can talk to understand what they like or don't like about the system. It's just a matter of pulling some strings to find connections to those people. And also, that's like a last resort. It's something I've done rarely on this project, but I've done in previous project when I didn't have any of these. I worked in a different environment where I had no access to any sort of customer whatsoever. So I had to Google people on LinkedIn in a different project to find any sort of communities or people of the industry, of the domain I was working on, to understand how they operated. But actually, I used Reddit even in this project. Anyone knows Reddit? Great. Turns out Reddit has a great community called 911 Dispatchers, where people post things, what they like, what they don't like about systems, and that's very honest feedback sometimes. Some of the things, the expressions they use were like, oops. I wouldn't say it in front of my mom. But it's a good thing to to broaden up your search, because sometimes you can get feedback, or you can find connections who will give you feedback you need in a very unexpected place. And so how did I find them, right? How did I find these people? Yet again, my past experience with other Motorola projects helped, because I was already exposed to a number of agencies who became pretty friendly. You said a very good term, I think it was used, friendly customers. It's important to have friendly customers or friendly people connections, because they can, why? Actually, why? Why do you think it's important to have friendly connections, with friendly customer connections? Any thoughts? Why friendly is better than not friendly? That's one. Yeah, there's another one. Another one I'm hoping to hear. Yeah, well, I didn't think about that one. Yeah. So there is one more thing. That's very good, but there's, I think, one more thing. Precisely. Precisely, it helps to network more. If you have those friendly people, they're going to help you find more friendly people, or sometimes not so friendly, because you will need that not friendly feedback at times to kind of, sober up a bit. Like, we're building this great product, and then you get this feedback, and you're like, oh crap, wow. So studying organization, Motorola is big, right? So there are lots of departments, interconnected, whatever. So if you're building a product and you are a part of large organization, explore it. Find people in different, parts which may be of relevance to you in what you're doing. And that worked for me. Ask for recommendations. This is precisely what you mentioned. And reaching out. It's okay to reach out with questions. Hey, I saw you in this support ticket asking about this bug. Why is it so important to you? Or, hey, I saw you request this enhancement in this product. Can we talk about why you want that? And that gives those beginning of relationships that you can then evolve, develop, and get those people who will be able to jump on calls with you on a very short notice to give pretty much immediate ad hoc feedback on critical questions. That's probably one of the most valuable things in doing all of this, because you build this relationship. And company events, Motorola has a summit, which is like a annual conference with users, where you can just have a face-to-face meeting, and you can talk to people, and they can understand who you are, and it just helps in building this further level of trust. And just, some of the examples of other people worth considering internally, right? Especially when building a new product is, and as we're an enterprise environment, it's not just you open this link and you go to a website and you start using it. In this environment, there is some on-prem component, some installation process, some deployment and support process. And so you don't want to get, I did not just got connections with users or, ex-users. By the way, when I say user, sounds like I'm talking about drugs, ex-users. It was also support and install people and customer success and demo teams. So it's important to kind of broaden the reach to very different personas, because it helps to make sure that you don't miss requirements and features important for different level of project's operation. And actually, so now, we have this 3 components, right? We know who we're after. We know what we're supposed to do, more or less. We know who to talk to. What do you think would be a next logical step? Build it? Okay. Yeah, and so it's, yeah, that's actually, so we have the backlog. The backlog is not shown here, but it's, some sort of set of things that we're building based on that roadmap that we've established. And one very important thing I wanted to mention, it's less difficult, I think, to be a copycat in a sense. We can just take the features the way they exist in other systems that we are kind of replacing and just copy implementation in a different UI. It sounds, at least it sounds a little easier than kind of reinventing the wheel and reinventing how it's supposed to function, maybe redesigning the whole functionality around it. So it's a safer, in general, it seems to be safer to go with, we know we need this feature, so we're just going to build the bare minimum similar to what this product supports that we're replacing, and that's where we'll end with this specific feature. But then that MVP that I mentioned, right, when we had the meeting with people, and I asked them to put above the line is like bare minimum. It's like a boring product, right? I will not consider the product if it doesn't have these features. But there is no excitement there. There is nothing, I want to use this. I want to be a part of community that is adopting this product. So it's natural, at least it was natural for us to try and add some features. You could call them bells and whistles, but they're not really bells and whistles. They're just delighters. So if you use a Kano model, right, the delighters, which are adding some things you haven't had before in the product. And but those things are risky because in reality, I don't know what they are. And that's where, while we have a feature that we know we're supposed to build, for example, hazards, it's essential for a CAD system to indicate that the location of the incident has some sort of a hazard information, like maybe the person who lives there has been violent to police in the past. It's very important to surface that information as a part of CAD incident. We know that it's a given that must be done. But none of the CAD systems that Motorola had explored some other functionality where what if we surface this information in places in the system where they haven't been surfaced before. So we have some risks or some possible behavior we can improve, we can make better, but people have never had this before, right? So if we add this without testing that, we risk. We have a lot of risk because we don't know, do people see it valuable enough or not? So all we're doing here is, what I'm trying to convey with this slide is, there are things you know or you think you know you need to do, and there are things you want to do, but you don't know really to what extent and how they're supposed to function. So there are some risks, right? And in a way, your backlog, well, our backlog became like a few backlogs. We have a backlog of things we know we need to do, and we have a backlog of things we want to research, we want to understand better. And those are the ones that we were doing testing on. So before we built something, right, we prepared a few concepts, and we showed those concepts to those friendly customers we had connection with. And we tried to basically run testing, clickable prototypes or just concepts or just static screens to understand what people are saying. If we added the functionality they have never had before to the system, how would they react? What would their feedback be? And one thing that I learned actually in doing so, it's not that it's just valuable, but it was even more valuable to include developers into those conversations. Because when they get first-hand feedback from a possible customer about why something is valuable, somehow that changes how they think. They start asking more questions, not just by when it's supposed to be done or how it's supposed to function in this, but they start challenging me as a product person, and that's good because the more challenging questions I get, the more I make sure I don't do things blindly. So that was, that was where we basically were getting feedback in this kind of sense. And some techniques we were using here were just separation of problem interviews and solution interviews. For problem interviews, if we were just discussing why is this workflow necessary, how can we make it better. And we also had solution interviews where we were presenting our vision of solution and getting feedback either through show and tell. Oops. Yeah, thank you. Show and tell, where we just walk through a concept and we ask for feedback, or actual more of a testing where we don't tell much and we just ask them to click through it and give us and see if they're able to complete those tests or not. And I think we lost it again. So, we have this mechanism of getting feedback. We were building the product. Okay, still don't have a customer. What do you think we do next? What would you do next? Any thoughts? Well, okay, I'll try to give you my answer. We do as close as possible to getting what may be like using an actual product. So once we build it, we find those agencies who are friendly to try and use the system on a limited basis to complete critical tests in the system, critical workflows, and give us feedback with the functional software. Because regardless of how many times and what you show them as prototypes, when a person experiences the actual functionality in an actual system, you will probably get a different feedback. And we did get a lot of different feedback. So this was our way of basically managing, of getting more direct feedback, more exact feedback as we were building the software without having a customer. And now we are in this phase of wrapping up all this development work and getting ready for a deployment to an actual customer, which will happen in a few months. And packaging things like delivering functionality to prod is only the beginning in this case, because we now have to make sure we have all this aspects of stability and infrastructure that I mentioned earlier about the kind of environment we're operating in, where it's essential to have a stable product, because even though it's simple and it's going to a small agency, it's also in the mission critical environment. And developing functionality is just the tip of an iceberg, which we have to work with this install and support teams. And I guess again, if I'm here next year, maybe I'll be able to speak to how this actually rolled out with an actual implementation and give more feedback, more information about how the rollout actually went. And to conclude all of this, it may look like, when building any product, that the road to the first customer is very long. It's very tedious. It's very difficult to get there. But there are maybe some points on the road that can be leveraged to obtain this actual feedback, which is at least giving you some sort of indication you're moving in the right direction. And to do that, we use this concept of proxy customers that has helped us to obtain all the information we were able to do at this point, and at least have some sense of confidence in what we're doing next. And at this point in time, I think I'm done, and we're open for questions if there are any.
So Vlad, I understand that there is no customer, but you have a backlog of features or functionalities. And how do you implement them? I mean, do you implement them like in little batches and then you ask the customer proxies for feedback? Do you use regular sprints for that? Or are you just building some large batch of the product and then ask agencies for feedback? So in other words, how much iterative the process is?
Okay.
And how frequently you interact with customer proxies?
Very good
on
question.
The way?
Very good question. So initially, when we had those when we had those slides I had here, this MVP, right? Let's say this is a group of functionality. For example, hazards. Hazards means that we have to surface some information about alerts at the location, and people are able to interact with those alerts and understand what's wrong with the location. There is a number of stories or actually features within that functionality that can be done. So what we do is we try to determine what's the minimum that we really need, and that's that becomes a set of features within, I guess, an epic, if we use those terms. And we build that, but before we build it, first we want to have a complete workflow that we show to proxies. So we show the concept before we do it, and we use the feedback to correct the stories, maybe reprioritize some of them. We build it, and then either we demo it to the proxies, or we have a usability test session where people log in to the actual software and try to play with it, and we use that feedback to then determine our next steps. But it hasn't been very iterative in the sense that we haven't really incremented much on a particular feature set. We moved on to the different feature. If we had very different feedback, very negative feedback or whatever about the feature, then we had to come back. But so far it hasn't happened. So far, because we had this pre-concept or testing concepts before we build it, that's helped us to identify I think major roadblocks. So when we did those usability test studies afterwards, we didn't find major issues with what we've done so far. Hope I answered the question.
Add something or ask something. So is your product in a releasable state every, I don't know, sprint or month, despite not having customers, or is it rather?
Okay, so like, this is where it gets tricky, because I'm coming back to the context, right? you can't release a CAD system which does just allow you to create incidents, because you have to be able to manage units as well and other things. So there is a certain set of capabilities you have to have. Once you're past that, you can release basically as often as you want with whatever minor versions you have. But the first version has to be functional enough, because agencies would be using it on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. So it has to have a set of functionality that enables the agency to operate daily. So it means we have to have a baseline of the product to be able to iterate and add incremental improvements, but there has to be a baseline version that has to have the critical capabilities at start.
Thank you.
Well,
you said that you have no customers, so how you decided that you need new kind of CAD system, and how you interpret that users that police, tag department, fire department that are using CAD systems now that they are not satisfied, and you need to build a new one?
so first of all, it's not just, I mean, it wasn't my decision, right? It's Motorola is a big company, so that was decided long before I even joined the product that we have to have a new system. But why? The market pressure, because there are companies emerging in the space continuously, and the systems that exist out there, there are a few new ones, but most of them are coming from 80s or 90s. And at some point, when you have a 20 or 30-year-old system, which is quite feature-rich, right, the maintenance and the ability to support and sustain a system is very expensive. So there is a natural tendency to start from scratch, because that's a way to reduce complexity and to be able to innovate, because there is so much you can do when you have a certain architecture in place that at some point becomes a roadblock for making significant enhancements. So there is a market pressure, there is internal pressure in terms of some system being obsolete, and those are the main drivers. Yeah, I think there was one more question.
So did you migrate existing customers to the new system as well?
That's a very interesting question, because the strategy so far is that we're not trying to cannibalize our own products, right? And we're trying, actually, this is where it's interesting, because with this system, where we're not feature rich at all, right? We're pretty shallow in terms of features, because, you know, think about development for 3 years versus development for 30 years, right? There is so much that has been done in those 30 years in those systems. But that's where I was trying to say it's important to segment. If we can find agencies in the market that are coming off paper, or because there are still public safety agencies in the US who are using Excel to manage incidents. Yes, they cannot spend a lot of money, but they are out there, and they will take what you give them as long as it doesn't go across a certain cost point. And because of that, there is at least some market for those agencies you can leverage to be able to attract. And it's not really about moving our current customers, it's about getting someone who will use the system to build it over time. It's to answer your question.
I have one question about contradictory feedback, because you said you have some like friends, let's say former firefighters or policemen and so on. When you have the actual client and he says, okay, I like it, I don't like it, it's simple. But when you have only like, you know, proxy client and some of them say, I like it and some of them don't, how do you actually decide on the way you go?
And you don't react to, yeah, I like it or I don't like it, right? That's probably the short answer is that like or don't like doesn't mean anything. What matters is the answer why. Because if you are able to dig into the why, if you like something or you don't like something, and you understand the context, and and that's why it's also important to not talk to one person, right? That's why we have 30 agencies or 40 agencies that we talk to on periodic basis, because there has to be some sort of a range of answers. Because when we can see some sort of a general direction in terms of why they like it or why they don't like it, that's the thing we're after. It's understanding the intent and not just the direct feedback you're getting from most people. hopefully I answered your question. Well,
any more questions? Last questions, perhaps? Anybody? Okay, then. Thank you.
thank you very much.